if you ask them, especially coaches, are always going to ask players like, hey, you think you're ready? Like, players are always going to say they're ready.
Right.
So you almost have to, not almost, you really have to put them in a position where like, hey, you got to show them a little failure that's not going to set them back.
Humor me for a moment and think back to when you were a teenager. Now, for some of us like myself, we may be thinking back years or decades, and for some of you listening, it may be very, very recent. But when you're young, everything in your life is so fresh and new. Everything's in front of you. And you're still at that beautiful point where you can dream of all the great things to come. You're young, athletic, healthy, maybe getting ready to go to college. And just before you leave, tragedy strikes. You're driving your car, fall asleep at the wheel, and when it's all said and done, you lose one of your legs below the knee. Now, at the risk of sounding dramatic here, I want you to ask yourself, how would you react? How would you respond to something this devastating happening to you? And these are the questions I keep asking myself ever since my chat with Andrew Hauser. And to be frank, I'm not sure I know how I would respond. We all like to think we're tough. We all like to think we're strong in the face of adversity. But when something like this happens, how do we respond? The thing that's interesting to me is that I find the challenges in life have a way of forging us into something bigger and stronger than we currently are. And that's definitely what happened with Andrew. He took those trials, those struggles, and turned them into his passion today, helping his athletes get through the return to play process. Andrew has worked in a number of capacities in professional baseball, both in the strength and medical capacities. Most recently, he was the Director of Performance Rehab for the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Director of Player Health and Performance for the Atlanta Braves. And recently, he's made the dive into the private sector in Phoenix, Arizona, focusing on training, rehab, return to play, and consulting, starting his own business called Continuum High Performance. But today, we're really going to lock in on this idea of return to play, or maybe more specifically, return to performance. Because let's be honest here, lots of people are talking about return to play, but how many are really doing it at a high level? And how are they doing it at the highest levels of sport? I mean, Andrew's worked with the Dodgers, he's worked with the Braves, he's seen it, he's been in it. But the biggest question probably for you is, how can you take this knowledge to help your clients and athletes get better results when coming back from injury? That's what we're going to be talking about today, and I couldn't be more excited. Return to performance is something we're trying to do at the highest levels here at iFast, with everyone from the guy or gal who likes to play tennis on the weekends to elite athletes in the NBA, NFL, or MLS. Now, if you're a regular to the show, welcome back. As always, love and appreciate you. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm Mike Robertson, and this is the Physical Preparation Podcast. In this show, we take deep dives into the art and science of coaching, cueing, program design, business, and personal development. Basically anything to help you become a better trainer, coach, or rehab professional. So what is new in my neck of the woods? Great question. Athletes are doing great in the gym. I've got a ton of basketball guys in, all sorts of different timelines for them. We got guys that are getting ready for summer league. We got guys that are getting ready for training camps coming up. Guys hitting free agency. So a lot of activity, a lot of buzz around the gym, and I absolutely love it. Can't wait today. I'm actually going to get to go watch the guys scrimmage live a little bit. So always get to do that whenever I get the opportunity. So basketball guys are doing great. I call them my college crew. It's kind of a misnomer now because we've got some college soccer players. We got a race car driver in there. We've got G, who's like just a do-it-all, played football, played rugby. Now he's dabbling in like some powerlifting type stuff. So I got G in there. It's just a great group. So everybody that I'm working with right now is doing great. Very happy with where they're at. The kids are doing great in their respective sports. Cade is crushing it in baseball. Had a huge game the other night. I think he was 3 for 4, 2 doubles. Really smacking the ball all over the field, so that's fun to watch. Kendall's soccer tournament is coming up this weekend, so a little bit of nerves going into that. You know, when you're in a tournament, you gotta win, right? Bottom line, you can't draw, you can't lose, you gotta get wins. So we had a really bad game a couple weeks ago. We've rebounded. We've had some really good practices, and I feel very confident in how we're going to play this weekend. But I keep telling the girls, hey, look, just because we won the championship in the fall means absolutely nothing right now. Right now, today, we got to win game Friday. We got to win a game Saturday if we have any chance of getting into a game on Sunday. So Wish me luck. Excited about the tournament, but also a little bit nervy, which is weird because, they're 5th and 6th grade girls, but I just love this group. And I know I've talked about them quite a bit in the show in the past, but they're just an awesome group of girls and very excited to coach them one final weekend. So we got that. Kendall had her first track meet last weekend, which was awesome. Something that I've reflected on a lot in the past was when I was growing up, I always played team sports. I never played a stopwatch type sport. And when I say stopwatch, I mean like a track and field or maybe something like powerlifting, which I got into later on. Because the great thing about those individual sports is, yes, you're competing against the field, but you're also always competing against yourself. So it can help teach you about the process. So I don't think she did quite as well as she would have liked, which is fine. I just told her, hey, look, you have a baseline now. You know what your 100-meter time is. You know what your long jump distance is. Now we go back to work and we try and get a little bit better each week. So very excited for her. She seems to love track. And hey, man, I kind of reached out on Twitter to like Derek Hansen, Boo Schexnader, some of the people that I've had on the show over the years. And I'm like, hey, I may be reaching out to you if she gets serious about this. So kids sports are doing great. Really excited about some of the guests I've got coming up on the show. I got my guy Joe Kin coming back on, the big house himself. Jill Coleman, who's an absolute lady boss. Can't wait to have her on. My nutrition coach, Trevor Ratsky. Really excited to have Trevor on, share kind of my journey. Pretty successful journey overall, too. I think I'm down 15, 16 total pounds. Hit my goal weight yesterday or a day before. So very excited about where I'm at there and excited to get Trevor on and just talk about that process. I'm going to have some NBA guys on because they're finally in their off season. So the podcast is going to be lit the next couple months. I hope you keep tuning in and I hope you enjoy it. Slovenia is coming up, believe it or not, like 10 days. It's always weird because it takes so much time to get ready for these events, and then like all of a sudden they're on you, and then you're there, and then it's over. So it always seems to get very fast towards the end, but definitely looking forward to going back to Slovenia. It was such a great experience the first time. Amazing people. I love Matej, his whole team. So very, very excited to do that. Man, as you can tell, life is really good. No complaints. Hope you can say the same. So with that being said, we're going to take a quick break, little message from our sponsors, and then we're going to jump into this awesome episode with my guy, Andrew Hauser. Today's episode of the Physical Preparation Podcast is brought to you by Exerfly. If you're unfamiliar with flywheel training, it's a method of strength training where your athletes generate resistance by using the inertia of a flywheel instead of traditional gravity-based resistance training. By accelerating and then decelerating a disc, your athletes generate resistance at all phases of the movement. This allows for high force training as well as eccentric overloading without the need for crazy heavy weights. I first got interested in flywheel training because I wanted my athletes to be better prepared for sport. Standard free weight training is great for the early preparatory phases, but I wanted something that could improve the rate of force development in both the concentric and eccentric phases of the lift. Most importantly, I wanted to make sure my athletes were prepared for those eccentric forces that they'll encounter in sports. And with their motorized technology, the Exerfly allows you to increase the eccentric phase of the lift from anywhere from 1 up to 80%. The biggest objection I had early on was learning a new piece of tech or equipment. After all, sometimes these things sound great, but really aren't all that functional, or they take forever to figure out. But luckily, if you take the time to watch a few short videos and experiment a little bit, you'll be using the Exerfly like a pro in no time. Setup is quick and easy, and my athletes are absolutely loving it. Last but not least, there are tons of different exercises and variations you can use as well. Whether we're talking squats, hinges, presses, split squats, if you can think of it, chances are you can figure out a way to do it with the Exerfly. The really cool thing is Exerfly is used by numerous teams in the NFL, NBA, over 50% of the English Premier League, and numerous Olympic developmental programs as well. Now, as a small business owner, I'd normally think, hey, this is way outside of my budget, I can't afford it, because we all know in a small business, every penny counts. But Exerfly has you covered there as well. They offer 36-month interest-free financing, so you can get started ASAP with your training and pay as you go. And when you factor in a 30-day money-back guarantee, 2-year warranty, and free shipping, I really believe this is a solid investment. Look, the bottom line is this. If I don't really love something, I'm not going to promote it on my show. I love my Exerfly, the results I'm getting with it, and I think you will as well. To learn more, head over to exerfly.com so you can start building some savage athletic beasts in your gym. Again, that's exerfly.com. Andrew, man, thanks so much for coming on the show here today. Really, really excited to have you on. Could you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's been a long time since we've gotten to catch up.
I know.
So I've been in professional baseball for the last 14, 15 years as a strength coach and athletic trainer. Most recently, I was the Director of Performance Rehab with the Dodgers. And then I was the Performance Director with the Braves prior to that. So gotten to wear a number of different hats in that space, like whether it be training, rehab, return to play, just from the medical side, just the hands-on side alone, and then really pulling a lot of staff development and staff integration stuff together, especially in Atlanta. That was a really big piece of that. And then just like yourself, kind of kicking it on the continuing education circuit and trying to learn from as many people as I can, like yourself. Let's see, I'm a Midwest guy at heart. I mean, I grew up in Southeast Kansas, more toward, suburbs, but close to Canton, about 45 minutes south of Kansas City.
Okay.
Like where the Royals and the Chiefs are. And then like all my family's still back in the Midwest. My wife's from New Mexico. That's a whole other story.
Ooh.
How we met.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she's a physical therapist as well. And now just taking this big next venture into the private space. And it's been, learned a lot about both the professional and the private space, I feel like, already. And it's only been, a few months, 3-4 months.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely going to tap into that here later on. But one thing I'm really interested in, and I love getting people's backstory, like how did you get into the world of physical preparation? Like how did you get started in all this?
Yeah. So this is probably it's going to be a little bit like the stories you probably had from some of your other people, like people getting injured and like, oh, okay. So that's part of it for sure. So I was a good high school athlete. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, what I wanted to go to college for. I was just like, I'm going to go play baseball, or I'll figure it out.
Right.
Always loved to train. That never felt like, that's always been kind of my getaway, like my space where I could just, almost like my meditation. And then the day we got back from our state baseball tournament, my senior year of high school, I got in a really bad car accident, single car, where the door actually amputated my leg on site. So I lost, I've got about 4 or 5 inches below my left knee that the doctors were able to save. Yeah. And so, that's how I started my college life. Yeah. Really. It was like, okay, you have one leg now. Let's figure this out.
All right.
And because of that, that just kind of threw me into a spin, because I was like, okay, I've always identified myself as athlete. Like, now what? So I went to school. I was rehabbing with a physical therapist. I was like, man, I know this is part of the process, but I need more. I need to be pushed more. And I ended up, there was a gentleman and another lady that was she's an amateur boxer, and they were athletic trainers. My mom randomly found this at the time. I was 18. Like, hey, maybe we could try this. Because I don't honestly really remember going to see athletic trainers, or all our coaches were the strength coaches.
Yep.
And so I went and saw these individuals, and they treated me like they trained me.
Yeah.
Really. And I was like, oh, okay, this is. So I thought athletic training and strength conditioning were the same thing. I mean, the name would lead you to assume that.
Yeah.
Which again, that's another conversation. They need some work on that front, I think. But yeah, so I started training with them, and I was going to, I ended up staying in state and going to University of Kansas at the time. And then I found out like, oh, okay, they have an athletic training program here. So I started like doing hours. This is kind of the transition from where you just like would get your hours signed off on, and before they went like super legitimate. So I would just like, I'd go back and like shadow the people that were training me. I'd train with them. And that was really my push into the field. And then again, I just always like, from that day, I always saw it's just one profession.
Right.
I know we all have to have licensure and for different legality issues, but I mean, truly, and maybe I was lucky because that's just, I saw it through that lens from day one.
Right. Okay, so last but not least, going from school to where you're at now, like fill in those gaps, because I feel like you've had a pretty sweet career. So just fill us in on those, because it's pretty cool.
Okay, yeah. So University of Kansas, and it really starts there. I was getting my hours. I was like, I want to see what else is out there. So like I interned for a chiropractor, and like all this guy did was ART, and I was like, man, this guy is like, this is not stuff I'm seeing in the training room. Like this guy's getting like way better results than I'm seeing. And he's only seeing people like between 1 and 3 times a week for like 15 minutes to half an hour. It's like, all right, there's something here. So that like got me super hungry. And then I ended up getting an internship with after my junior year at Kansas with the Arizona Diamondbacks. And so I got kind of plugged into that circle. And at the time, they were just looking at some things a little differently. They had a soft tissue guy there at the mid. So I was at the long-term rehab, and then I'd go do like AAA in the evening when the AAA team was home.
Yep.
And this was in Tucson at the time. So it was just funny how things kind of come full circle. So I actually met Neil Ramp. He was the basketball strength coach at University of Arizona at the time. So I met him like through a friend.
Hang on. Neil was in basketball?
Yeah. He
what?
Was,
I never knew that.
Yeah, U of A strength coach.
Okay.
Yeah. So like, again, I met him through one of our athletic trainers at Kansas connected me with a friend that she went to undergrad with. That's like Neil's best friend, who was an athletic trainer at U of A at the time. And I remember going, how I met Neil is funny because I went over, this guy invited me out, like, hey, we're going to go out tonight. You're welcome to come along. And I show up and we're going to roller derby.
Oh, solid.
Like, all right. So everybody's dressed up except for me. Like I'm probably in like my collared shirt, jeans, trying to be super suave. And I remember walking in, Neil's got like short cut off, like jorts on, and he was a strength coach at the time. So he's not like, he's a thick guy anyways. And like his thighs were massive.
Yeah. He's
got a wig on. I was like, oh my God, what did I just dip myself into?
Yeah.
But yeah, so like they were going through like the Diamondbacks at the time, just to kind of redirect. They were looking at Willem Kramer is the soft tissue guy from the Netherlands there, which really is pretty close to fascial distortion model, I'd say. Like looking back on it now, I've never met anybody with quite that knowledge of anatomy until I met him. But he was with the major league club, but he was like, that was kind of going down, and like Ken Crenshaw, Nate Shaw, they were pushing a lot of those things at that time. So Pete, the head trainer for the Cubs at the time, was really like the person I was interning under. And they were starting to push anatomy trains. So I was just getting like exposed to all of these things, and it was just like prime time. It's like, this is the first time I've been like super excited about learning, and like everybody was kind of pushing one another, like whether it's like staying up on anatomy or whatever. And it was like, okay, that felt like a team environment. And I hadn't felt that since I'd gotten out of sports, really.
Right.
And it just, everything, happens at the right time. Like, it just lit a fire for me personally. And like, I was like an insatiable thirst to learn at that point. So it was like, okay, like as soon as we got back, like I had to go to school, obviously, but I'd like if we had a break, I'd go to like an ART course, or I was always just looking up, and I was starting to read a ton. And so I actually, like, I graduated school a little bit early, and was a strength coach with the Phillies for a year. And that was good to get, like, that's, again, I didn't know, like, I knew I wanted to be hands-on. I knew I wanted to train people. So it was a good entrance into pro ball. And I, like, just to be honest, like, after I got out, I was like, man, I don't know if pro ball is necessarily where I want to be. It just seems like there's more, but I think it's just about getting in, like, the right fit. Like,
Right.
so I ended up taking a role with the Tampa Bay Rays as an athletic trainer, and that was perfect. Like, I was really just almost like wound up and go.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting mentored along the way by some different people, but like I mean, again, I was working full time in the off season at the PT clinic, randomly in New Mexico. So that's how I met my wife. But yeah, it was perfect because I'd get like 45 minutes with a person, and like I'd go take a course, and then I'd essentially like go experiment. And
Yeah.
like, I would just try to like run that system as far as I could, so I could punch holes in it more or less. And they're like, okay, once some holes were in it, then like, how do I fill those gaps?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I mean, it was really, for me, it was all like, still like, I want to learn as much as I can, but figuring out no one system's perfect, you know. Maybe the human body that might be the one system, but like, so many tools, and this was big later on as got deeper and deeper into pro sports. Like, you need tools to meet, like, I heard Charlie Weingroff say this one time, and it always stuck with me. Like, we met actually at a DNS course long time ago.
Yeah.
And he said, like, everybody's got a key. And so with DNS at the time, it's figuring out like, okay, well, what's going to be my access point with DNS? But I think I see that as like, everybody's got, like, you've got to have multiple keys. Like, we're not sure what the skeleton key is, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got multiple keys, multiple tools to help get into that door and meet that person where they're at. That's more than physical too.
Yeah, for sure.
But like, so worked my way up through Tampa. I got plucked off to go back to Arizona and kind of be in a spot that at this point Neil was over in Arizona. He was kind of on both middleman on both the medical and strength side. So I was essentially brought over to mirror that role at the minor league level. So it was like being an assistant strength coordinator and an assistant medical coordinator, and then just go where the need is. And then I spent 4 years there, and then the role in Atlanta came up, and that was like super exciting for me personally. Like, I've learned a ton everywhere I've gone. But that was like, it was the opportunity to build a staff. It was the opportunity to integrate the major leagues, the minor leagues, and like the strength, the medical, the nutrition, and really just start to marry everything together. And
Sure.
Like, that's ultimately what I wanted to do long term at that point in my career. And I was lucky enough. I mean, I got the opportunity, and you know what? Learned a lot along the way, and learned from a lot of people. Failed a lot too, but like those are generally how you
get better, man.
Yeah. And I think giving people the safe place to also feel like they could fail along the way. I think any leadership role I've ever been able to be in, like, that was huge. So, like, I've been in environments where you didn't feel safe and where you did feel safe, and like, those are two totally different situations. And especially as a young professional, like, you need that opportunity to make those mistakes. And got a little one on the way, but you are a parent. Like,
yes,
you've got to let your kids fall. You've got to let them figure that stuff. That's how development happens.
Yep.
And I think that gets lost a lot in not by every club, every organization, but I think we always want to make things as safe as possible. But I think we need to reframe how we're looking at safety.
Yeah.
So a lot happened in Atlanta. Some stuff with the front office. I ended up leaving after we made the playoffs in 18, which was unbelievable, going from we were a wreck when I got there 16. Just as far as like the on-field product, like we were just not a good team.
Right.
Had some good pieces, but just not a good team at that point. And then to go through that, make the playoffs, and then we've been talking about having a family and just a lot of different things going on. So we moved. The Dodgers opportunity came up, and so we hopped onto that, and that was it's a totally different market than Atlanta.
Yeah,
Certainly,
sure.
I mean, Atlanta just won the World Series, which was, that was great to see, just because I've seen so many of the people over there, like staff, players, coaches, go through some of the bad times too.
Yeah.
And to see that happen, totally different environment from Los Angeles. But there's a lot of learning lessons to come out of that, and had the opportunity to win and experience winning at the very top level too, which was unreal.
For sure.
We had to beat the Braves to get there. That didn't upset me too much at the time. But, and yeah, now into this totally new journey. So again, just worn a number of hats, and been pretty blessed as far as the opportunities and just the people I've got to meet. That's something I can't I would always want to pay it forward. Like I was very adamant on, like, anytime we go on the road or anybody I could connect with and learn something from, like I always want to do that. And like, even like in a baseball season's tough for personally and professionally, just because you've always got to be on. The off season's not really off; it just kind of shifts priorities. But being able to, like, when we're on the road, you have to go meet with different people in every city you go to, and you just build. It's an opportunity to learn, to build like actual relationships with people.
Sure.
And then their networks, like if you build a true relationship, like they open their network to you too. So it comes back tenfold.
For sure. Well, one thing that I know I want to talk to you about here today is this idea of return to play. And it's obviously a hot button topic, something that a lot of people are talking about. But I don't know that we always have the best understanding of how to set it up, how to lay it out, how to execute it. So for starters, because this is something you've done a lot in your space, let's start at the very beginning. Imagine somebody that you're working with is coming off a major injury. What are your absolute first steps in outlining that program that'll help get them back to 100%?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. Honestly, like Dave, like right when an injury happens, and I really got thrust into this part when I was in Atlanta, like I always had to come up with like, hey, we need timelines, like right away, like either that night or the next day. So being able to sit down with your staff at that point and say like, hey, like what's realistic here? So you get your physician in the mix, because ultimately he's got to be the one that he or she has to be the one that signs off on it.
Right.
To bring somebody back. But like doctors have their timelines, and then we have like, okay, that's just a framework for us to really work under and work with.
Yep.
And then it's starting to figure out like, all right, well, let's see, what is the injury? You know, like, is this a bone? Is this a muscle? Is this a traction nerve? Like where we have issues, like,
right.
I mean, you could run the gamut. Is this going to be surgical? Is you have to start thinking about like, all right, diagnostics. You have to start thinking about medications that are going to be involved. You have to start thinking about like, all right, what can they do right now? And that might be the most important thing that we could even talk about, because I think the big thing with, especially like, I mean, I think athletes at all, professional athletes for sure, they always want to do more or be doing something at least. And you have to be careful, because if you take that away and say like, no, you're just shut down. Like that could be psychologically, or just like, I mean, that totally flips their world upside down. When we talk about the psychological side of things in rehab, I mean, that's huge. Like, what can you do? Like,
Yes.
let's start there, and then we can build out what you need to be doing from there. So I think making them feel better after that is like, okay, that's number one. And so like, but there's a lot of layers to that, because it's like the hands-on portion, the nutritional portion, just giving them a few days to decompress. Sometimes they do need to step off the gas. I heard, I was listening to Steven Seiler, the physiologist, talk about that the other day. There's he's an Olympic gold medalist and world record holder in like the 5,000 and 10,000 speed skating. And he made sure during his training, like he always had 2 days off a week, which I was like, wow, like
that's a lot.
That is a lot, especially at the top level. And you can't do that in baseball unless it's super long term, or like most sports you can't do.
Right.
But from a psychological perspective, that's something I had learned. Like that was refreshing to hear on that end, that somebody at that level is doing that. But the flip side of that, I remember something when I first got into like a leadership role. This guy's actually the Yankees head strength coach now. We work together, and he's like, man, I've seen, like, I can give these guys whatever, like, I want. Like, I could be the greatest program ever. They're probably going to go home for the holidays, not do anything. He said, I've seen more guys come back better from not doing anything than I have like writing a perfect program.
Right.
And I think there's a lot to that we just take for granted. And front offices, I can say, like, definitely take that piece for granted more often than not, unless they were like played more recently, I should say. But like that, again, it's coaches are kind of the same. Like, the longer they get away from that, a lot of the harder it is to fully comprehend.
Yeah.
But again, like back to your question, like there's all these layers, like your head strength coach, your head trainer, and maybe like whoever this injured player is, like maybe he doesn't work with either of those people, or maybe works with the assistant in one of these spaces. Maybe they have an outside guy, which
right
is definitely a reality, especially like certain sports. It's happening in all sports, but some sports are more prone to it than others. Like the biggest thing is keeping the athlete at the center of it, knowing like, hey, like what do you think, and getting them involved in the process. Because to me, it's like, I'm going to create these timelines that may not be worth anything at the end of the day, but like an A, B, and a C. Like, hey, like aggressive, this is kind of middle of the road, and this is super conservative. This is what we're thinking. But at the end of the day, like, the athlete knows their body better than we're ever going to know it.
Yes.
And I think it's very easy to forget that, especially the longer you do it. It's because you've had so many reps with certain guys, like, this is probably going to take about this long, but that's an average,
right.
You know, and like, this athlete's different than the last athlete you treated that had that. And I think for even to take this a step further, like the physiological component is like, this gets ignored a lot in the professional sports world, I think, is like, how's their body set up to help them heal? Mm-hmm. Like, so how can we help set that environment up? So like, maybe they have super low CO2 levels, you know, and like, but it's stuff like that doesn't get talked about a lot. Or maybe like after an injury, injured tissue can't utilize oxygen. So what are we doing to combat that and help speed that process up? And those are things that you have to have that checklist and start really diving into those things, because that's great if a guy his force plate numbers are starting to look good again. Great. But if he can elicit that contraction, can he let go of that contraction?
Right.
Like, those are things that, and that's actually what drove me. Like, those questions have what driven me to different like people to learn from along the way. And I think it's you're just always opening Pandora's box.
Yeah.
In all of those situations. But so it ends up being this massive checklist of things that like, all right, like we got to figure out how do we make this digestible for the player? How do we make this make sense for ourselves? How do we divvy it up? And then our front office to keep them like they don't care about like, oh, we're going to get this guy's left ventricle working way better,
Right.
like, or we're going to get him in a certain position so he can shift better to one side. They don't care about that. Like they want to know like when that person can be back, and like they want them performing at least the level they were at before.
Right.
Which again, that's another piece. Like those are opportunities, especially with technology going the way it is, with some of the VR capabilities and whatnot. Like those are opportunities to really start to dive down and say like, hey, this guy needs to work on this. How are we setting up a situation, again, an environment to get him to that point?
For sure. Okay, so kind of along these same lines, it's not just you like dictating all of this, right? It's like you and a team and a staff of people that are working towards this common goal. So in this integrated environment, how do you coordinate all of the team members so that ultimately they're all rowing in the same direction?
That's a great question. I think that's the question a lot of teams are ultimately trying to answer, because it's communication at the end of the day is the greatest thing. We talk about like psychological safety, like having the environment where you can openly disagree in a room of people. Nobody gets offended by it, and like having a constructive conversation. Those are the absolute best environments. And again, I'm not saying that you have to be friends with everyone you work with, but like generally like those friendships, those are like your true friendships, I think too, of like the people that can really punch you between the eyes, but you're like, oh, you see their perspective.
Right.
And you can do the same to them. Not everybody like having an angle where they're trying to put their stamp on the athlete, which I think is big.
Yes.
And you see that a lot in the the private side of things as well, which is again that's a very like interesting, unstable place to be.
Yes.
I think if you're trying to help the athlete, it puts the athlete in a weird spot. And you know what? Athletes aren't claiming, some of them are, but most of them aren't claiming to be experts in like these areas, and that's why they're looking for these people, both from their own staff and outside. And I think it goes both ways. Like they're looking for, I think, just people they can trust.
Right.
But to your point, like this is where I've seen it go a number of different ways. Like in Atlanta, especially, I think what worked well for us was like we would all meet together, and information would, like if I'm the director, information would funnel through me. But like I would like, we did a really good job of like, okay, we meet on somebody, we type up the notes, and like we recap it. So again, you're starting to look at just little things like how important your meetings are, and like how making those meetings more efficient are. You're like, okay, so let me get this straight. This is what I heard. Making sure like you have those pieces of information to go to, whether it's the player, the front office, especially going to the front office, because you want to make sure, number one, you're not throwing people under the bus that you're on staff with, but you're also representing the staff well and building them up. Again, like that's part of staff development. You want to set people up so they can like feel good. Number one, that they feel like they're being heard. They're taking that information that they recommend is getting passed across accurately, and then that puts them in a position where like, hey, like, you're seeing how these things, like when they run smoothly, how you take that and you run with it with another club, or you take my job. Like,
right.
Whatever it is, like ultimately, like you want all your staff to be in positions that like they have dreams to aspire to as well. I think again a little different turn on it, but now being able to spend time with a number of different organizations and staffs, I think that's huge, because more often than not, you have more people, once you get like the right environment, you have more people that want to be or that have the ability to be in those leadership positions. So
yep.
It goes back to also allowing them to fail. You just can't fail as grandiosely
Yes.
at the top level as you can maybe at the
bottom,
lower levels.
For sure.
But again, I think just making sure everybody feels heard and getting like the takes from all of those, but it's gotta flow through somewhere. Otherwise, you just have a boat that's got too many leaks. In my experience, there might be other places that do it differently. And again, there's so many roads lead to Rome. At the end of the day, that's just the way I've seen it most successful and how I've seen it keep everybody like cohesive.
Yes. Okay, so this may seem like a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I don't think it really is. You've got everybody on the same page. Now, how do you get everybody over the course of, let's say it's a longer term injury, a 6, 9, 12-month return to play process? Once you got everybody on the same page, how do you get them to stay on that same page and actually follow the plan?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think people being able to take the lead on different situations really help with that, because they're gonna, if player X just has a better relationship with this guy, like, hey, like, I want you to run point on this, but then it's their responsibility to like, hey, like he's not, this isn't really progressing the way I wanted, but this is going really well. Like, so again, you have to have regular follow-ups. Just because you set a plan, like, it never goes the way you write it out, ever.
Yeah, right.
Like, if I've had one ever, like, that was probably my fault because I kept him on that plan.
Right.
But it never goes by like a special calendar you created, or, oh my gosh, I have so many calendars. But they're always like, the plans have to be so adaptable. So if the plan has to be adaptable and we know that, how, like, why would we not be adapting to the player and like what they're going through, the athlete? And this is, to me, that's something important. It's more difficult in the private sector if you like, again, there's just more entities involved and they're not physically under the same roof.
Yes.
But like ultimately, and this is where I think there's probably low-hanging fruit in the private sector for almost like plan management from this side, especially with the high-end people, but also like the high school athletes, because there's oh, I feel better. Like, okay, like it's been, you haven't done anything for 12 weeks, but like you probably shouldn't throw a bullpen today, or we probably shouldn't be working on your hurdle takeoff. Like, so I do think like that program management is just an area that it will start to bring things together and start to bridge some of those gaps in the private space. But again, like, you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's where being in both areas now, obviously I have a lot more experience in the private world, so I've got to be biased more to lean off of that. But being able to take like what went well in those areas, like that is achievable in the private space. And like ultimately it should all feed back to your client and to the athlete and helping them grow higher and higher. But like it does come back to just upfront and transparent communication between the athlete and like whomever's taking the lead on that, and then keeping everybody in the loop, because there should be like they're having daily inputs with that person, with that athlete. If I'm working with this player, but the group doesn't necessarily have those daily inputs and checkpoints. So it's giving them responsibility, number one, and that's kind of a leadership thing for that individual, but to bring that back to the group, and then it's everybody always knows what's going on. And that was probably one of the first things. So Kim Crenshaw is the director of the Diamondbacks. Like, I remember vividly when I was when I moved into a coordinator role in Arizona, he said, no surprises. And like, that doesn't just go for like myself or like the front office, that should go for everybody in this room. Like, I shouldn't be blindsided by like, oh yeah, players doing X on these days. Like where did that come in, and like where does that fit?
Right.
Because again, ultimately, it's about the athlete being in the best position to succeed and to heal, and then to
Yes.
come off like, I think David Joyce termed it in like one of his books, like it's return to performance. It's not return to play.
Right.
So like when you start like returning to play is almost like, if I have a checklist, it's almost like 2 or 3 levels down from return to performance.
Yes.
So like, yeah, you can be out there and play, but like, are you ready to perform? Like, two wildly different things.
Yes. That I really like that. Okay, so you kind of mentioned this, but I want to flip this just a little bit. So things are going well, right? The athlete's progressing. All of a sudden, something happens, right? They have a setback. Talk to me about being malleable, being adjustable. Like, where does that come in? And I'm assuming you can probably draw from experience, right? Like you said, not every rehab goes exactly the way you want. So talk to me about how you navigate that time and how you maybe course correct to get them back on track.
Yeah, that's that's a real part of the industry, especially at the highest level, because the athlete pushes way more of the progression than maybe the therapist or the doctor or like that group of people making those decisions.
Yep.
Or for the front office, like they also help make a lot of those decisions.
Yeah.
But it's one of those fine lines that you're always like, because players are, if you ask them, especially coaches, are always going to ask players like, hey, you think you're ready? Like, players are always going to say they're ready.
Right.
So you almost have to put them, not almost, you really have to put them in a position where like, hey, you got to show them a little failure that's not going to set them back.
Okay.
And like, it's hard to know what that looks like until I think you get into the situation with that athlete. But like, and I think this is part of progression anyways. Like you want to take them kind of to the edge of like, I can't do this. Great. That's great. That's right where we need to be.
Right.
If they, maybe they get a little sore one day. Again, like I always have used that as an opportunity to be like, hey, like, that's okay. Like, you didn't re-injure yourself, but like this is just letting you know that you're not quite ready yet.
Yes.
And like that's information that's just your body's telling us this. It's not me. It's not you making up your mind. Your body is helping decide this. That's what originally had led me to even utilizing things like the Moxie monitor, because I was like, I'm tired of trying to tell people that like, hey, I don't think you're ready, but like I need something objective to tell you.
Right.
That you're not ready. Like I can't just go and just say like, oh, because of this great timeline I built out or that we built out, that you're going to be ready on this date. Like, no, they don't. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is. And when you get the subjective and the objective working together, like that to me is like you see a catapult in like athlete buy-in, and just trust that you get from that's what buy-in is, but just trust from the whole group involved in that process. Now, a lot of that stuff's in our short-term memory.
Yeah, sure.
But like, again, like if you can push them just enough to where like you're not setting them back, or again, like that's why I like the technologies I've always been driven to use have been things where it's like, okay, I know almost how far I can push them without pushing them over the edge. But I think you only get there from pushing someone over the edge, which is it's an unfortunate way to learn. But yeah, I mean, you just hope those mistakes aren't too big. Like I alluded to earlier. And sure, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I love the idea of objectifying these things, right? Because I think inherently most athletes struggle to be subjective, right? So case in point that I always use is like when prescribing weights to athletes, there's a reason I got away from prescribing weights and just use like VBT with like a gym aware or something like that. Because look, okay, that's great. You did 315 last week, but you've slept like 3 hours a night since then. You're hungover today. Like you're not going to hit 325 today. So when you take out the emotional element of it, or like the psychological, I should be better this week, and you provide them with something objective to fall back on, immediately it's like, oh, okay, well, either I'm in this zone or I'm not. And so it just makes everything in your life so much easier. I find like a lot of the back and forth that you would have had in the past isn't there anymore. It's just like, am I there?
Yeah.
Am I not? And it takes the emotion out of it, for lack of a better term.
100%. And honestly, that's something that I always, from a personal perspective, strove for with in decision-making roles. It's
yes.
like I need to be in these, like, there's going to be emotions. Like, I need to be able to be emotional about these things. So like,
yes.
How do I put processes or checks and balances in place? Or like, if all else fails, I need to have someone that I can turn to and say, hey, here's the situation. What do you think?
Yes.
Because like, if I'm in, you have to have, I think, the emotional intelligence to be able to step back and do that and not make that
rash decision,
that rash or reactionary decision. Because but you have to be able to identify those situations when that may be happening as well.
For sure.
But yeah, that's why I love, like, I'm always on the lookout for like, okay, what's just going to give me a better objective where I'm not going to have to test 14,000 things. Like,
yeah,
maybe I could do, again, the Moxie might be one option. An Omega Wave, if you have somebody that's going to be super diligent and stuff, like for those people that have used that. But maybe like a breath hold could tell me that. Maybe I think the water bags are actually really good for that, because if I'm doing really well, like maybe with what's normally a simple movement with the water bag, maybe I can't control it as well the next day. Like,
sure.
Okay, something's neurologically, something's different.
Right.
And I was literally having that same VBT talk with an Olympic athlete 3 days ago, because it's like, it's not me telling you need to put X amount of wheels on the bar. Like, this is you telling the bar that.
Yeah. Your body's dictating the show here, my friend.
Yep.
Okay, so something you had mentioned earlier I want to circle back to is the idea of the mental element and the mental side of return to play. So what role do you feel like a physical prep coach can help or fill in that space?
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts on this. Just and some of my colleagues and people I like stay in close contact with, I've gone deep down the psychological rabbit hole and tried to get to know as many good professionals in that space as I could because of this, because it goes pretty far. And I think having a situation set up where, again, it's not always you're not necessarily the one building in some of these things, but like if you can have a psychologist especially build in some of these things too, whether it's the training, whether it's their prep work, but it needs to be so seamless that the player does not realize that it's happening more often than not. And I think I've got a psychologist friend that does this really well as far as educating coaches. Now I have a strength coach or physical preparation coach friend that does this. Like, I was on a call with him yesterday and I just sat back. I was like, this is impressive, because he's layered so many things in and bringing more attention to something.
Okay.
And so it's like, they don't even realize that they're becoming more attentive to different things, or like correcting, like, hey, this person was very, they kind of cut themselves down. And like, if I heard it, like, I probably wouldn't think twice about it, but he caught on to it right away. And he's like, hey, like, and he'd catch him on it. And again, so now it's like, all right, so he's bringing attention to something and he's starting to change a narrative. And then he's doing that through the breath more often than not. Say, hey, when you do these things, like, what's your breath doing? So it's like, he's got kind of a trifecta going that I think is absolutely genius in how he operates. And I think long-term from an athlete, the psychologist is taking a different route where he's trying to teach the coaches as many skills as they can. So again, they can work things in seamlessly. Now it's more from a skills perspective, where the other gentleman's doing a way, and these people both do it way better than I do. That's why I'm choosing to talk about them. he's building it in more from like the soft skills intrinsic side, while they're building it more from the external side of things. So it's I think, again, if you can marry those things, then you've got a pretty freaking sweet environment.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings that whole thing full circle. Like, it's external and internal environment. That's what we're trying to. Those two things are really what set up, in my opinion, like sustainable performance.
Yeah, I love it, man. Okay, so I know we're kind of up against the clock here, but you've talked about this a couple times. You've moved, long tenure in pro sports. You've been in the game 14, 15 years there. Now you're in the private training world. What kind of learning experiences has that generated for you so far?
Yeah, now it's opened up a lot of different ideas, because now you're able to see warts on both sides of like the private space and the professional space. And quite honestly, like in the pro sports world, there are, no matter the caliber of the athlete at that, or the like esteem of that athlete, like there's so many people that need hands-on work, or need to be coached. Like there's just a lot, and like no matter what, like until it's a 2-to-1 or a 1-to-1 ratio, it's there's only so much time in the day. And so there is, like, I have a lot of empathy, especially towards like the football world. Like they have so many people, so many athletes to worry about. But that's been an eye opener of like, hey, like maybe that is the opportunity for the private space to be like get opportunities with some of these higher end athletes, because they can spend more time.
Sure.
They have the time to spend. But usually what happens, what I've seen, and it's just my experience, the good ones in the private space, very good communicators, but the athlete's paying them directly. So like, where's that, more often than not, creates a disconnect of like what information is getting transferred each way. And so I think when you can marry that communication process, and it's not where I think the pro sport model could get in trouble of trying to dictate maybe what's happening with that private sector person, because I've seen that too. And that, like, you don't want to, that's not why they're going to that person.
Right.
But when they can be involved in it, it keeps people's egos out of it. It keeps people, like, again, on the same page, where ultimately, like, hey, this is about the athlete. And what the private space gets in trouble with a lot is they try to put their stamp on an athlete.
Sure.
And when you do that, it's no longer about the athlete.
Yeah.
And like, the short time I've been in the private space, I've already been able to see that. And you're working around so many layers of stuff that if the athlete's not communicating those with you, then you're just going off your best guess, really at that point. And so you have to be careful, especially when they are in season, let's say with a team, that you're not doing all this work to make yourself look really good and put your stamp on the guy. Whereas like, he's going to, like, his job is to perform with that team on Sunday or every day of the week.
Right.
Or like, those two things don't work. So it's like, you've got to find, as the private space guy, like, hey, what's going to be the biggest bang for your buck that you can provide that athlete with, that's going to allow him to continue to perform. Because frankly, the better that athlete performs, the better you're going to look anyway. So why are you trying to make him be really good at this thing that, like, maybe it's just thrashing his nervous system, or thrashing his tissue, like his tissue just can't recover.
Yes.
So I think there's a gap between those two spaces, and I think, I hope I'm wrong, but I think that gap's going to grow, because the private sector individual is getting, like, more and more prominent in the pro sports world. Like, you're seeing it a lot in the NBA, you're seeing it into the NFL, and now you're starting to see it trickle into MLB. And I mean, it's in every sport, so it's not MLS. NHL, like, it's everywhere. But I think it is, like, everybody being on the same page to, like, help support the athlete. The athlete needs to take ownership of that. And I think it actually kind of goes back to this program manager idea, where I think that can really catapult the athlete that is going to have that private sector guy.
Yep. Yeah. The thing that I always try and remind myself of, and I think if you're a young physical prep coach, a young strength coach, and you want to be around high level athletes, I'm all for that. Like, I dreamed about doing that and I fulfilled that dream. But I think two things you have to remember, and you just said it very, very well. Number one, you have to be okay with the fact that you are support staff, right? Like, and especially in the private sector, right? Because you got to think, if we're looking at the food chain, they've got real coaches, right? Like GMs, real sport coaches. They've got performance coaches at their team that they have to answer to at some level. So I'm like the support staff of the support staff. So you really need to knock your ego back a bit and be okay with that. But you said it very well too. Like, look, at the end of the day, if you're just doing stuff to make them feel like they got to work out, you're going to lose, right? The goal at the end of the day is for them to perform at a high level, because a lot of these guys are superstitious. It's funny, we were having this discussion, but like, if they associate you with feeling good and playing good and getting another contract or getting a bigger contract, they're going to stay with you forever, right? Versus if they associate you with, oh, I feel tired, I have bad games, or I'm beat up, like, they're not going to stay with you. So it's weird, but sometimes doing less in the grand scheme is actually doing way more for them.
It's funny, like, to your point, some people I've seen get very good buy-in in the private space. They, no matter what they're doing hands-on, like, you could agree with it, you could not agree with it, they're always laughing, smiling, and like, some of them just tell jokes a lot. And like, it could be absolute nonsense, but I've seen those people get really good buy-in, and I've just sat back and been like, damn, like, what is it? Like, what am I missing here?
Yeah.
But there's definitely something to that. And I think the private sector, like, you have such a big opportunity to do things that they're not going to do with their team.
Yeah.
So like, when we talk about testing or monitoring, like, athletes at the top levels, like, all the tech and stuff that people get excited about, like, publicly, like, they're not going to use that because they think it's going to be used against them.
Yeah.
Once contracts come up, whether right or wrong, that's just like, that's where it's at.
Yeah.
So like, why wouldn't you, like, if I know that, but I, like, in the private space, like, you can fill that gap, and like, by being able to fill that gap, you're also setting them up again for like, you're educating the athlete. You're making them like, they're becoming like more responsible in the process, quite honestly.
Yes.
And like, that's pro athletes, like, they have, in some cases, they've got a lot of money. They've got more doors open to them because of that. But like, people at the brass tacks of it, like, people still crave some structure.
Yeah.
And like, when they lose that and the inmates run the asylum, like, it becomes, it just becomes you can become a detriment to your own success. I think at that point, and like, you can help them do that. But again, we talk about the mental side of it. Like, you can help them do that without, like, it's not taking them more, but it's just becoming a good checks and balance for them.
For sure. All right, my guy, big question time.
Yeah.
If you could alter the space-time continuum and give young Andrew Hauser one piece of advice, what would it be?
Can I go back to November 5th, 1955? No. One piece of advice. You know what? It would actually be to like really stay in the moment of like, when you think times are like the absolute worst, like, really pull in as much as you can in those situations, because like, as terrible as they seem, like, without fail, for me personally, like, I've always gone back, and like, those are the situations like I grew so much from, I learned so much from, and like, all you can think about when you're in those situations is to get out of the situations, but to really like, hey, like, just hang out there, like, I think as above, so below, or however the saying goes, or like, heaven's only going to go as high as like, as deep as hell goes. Like, you have to, like, I think, really go through a lot of those things and like you're going to come out the other side at the end of the day. And but just being able to take like get every sense involved and take advantage of those terrible situations.
Yeah.
It sounds weird, but it's like I wouldn't like even going back and like lose my leg, like I would not take that back just for like, would it be nice to have my leg? Yeah. But like, I don't want to take that back for like the path or the direction that sent me down, or just like the depth of learning that came just from that. Like I wouldn't have been able to learn those things otherwise.
It helped forge and mold your path, right? For sure.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Last but not least, lightning round. 4 fairly short questions. Your answers can be as long or short as you like. Number 1, what's your career highlight so far as a coach?
Great question. I think the World Series was incredible. That was a great experience, but it was actually making the playoffs the first time in Atlanta. Because again, like you've gotten to be a part of that whole, like from the cellar to now, like you're getting into the playoffs, and like, but being able to enjoy that with like staff that you helped develop and mentor, and like, and just going through seasons like that is tough enough, but being able to go like, essentially you may not have been up on the peak yet.
Yep.
But like you had gotten to base camp.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Okay, number 2. I feel like this is going to be redundant, so I'm going to tweak it slightly. I think you said, again, 14, 15 years in pro sports. Was there, and this is hard, but is there like one athlete, didn't have to be the best athlete, but one athlete or 2 athletes over the years that just really stood out to you for some reason?
Yeah. So it's, like, I think we all have athletes we've worked with, just be like you just want to be friends with them at the end of the day because they're just great people. So there's definitely there's a few of those that have just been every step along the way, like that you've really like appreciated. But one thing, I don't want this to be a cop-out answer, but one thing like I've really made it a priority to do over the years, especially as I've kind of gone higher up, is like there's something that makes these people elite at what they do. Mm-hmm. And like, it's multiple things, but in my opinion, the best of the best, there's always one thing that's just like, ooh, like I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that before. Like I just worked with this NFL athlete, like all pro, like obviously a great athlete, but like, ooh, like that guy has the ability to like lock in and focus better than anyone I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And like, okay, like I haven't seen that. I haven't seen it quite like that before. Or like one thing I've always respected, player I had in Atlanta, that no matter what, like no matter what he did, he could strike out, he could hit 4 home runs in a game. He was always right here. And that's something I started to see with guys that were like, had more sustainable success. No matter what their personality was, like there was always a regression to the mean. And their mean was not high, low.
Right.
Like they kept it pretty dialed. So there's just been a lot of athletes that have taught me a lot without them even realizing it over the years.
Yes. I love that part of it, don't you?
Yeah. Like, that's the best part.
Yeah. Okay, number 3. What are you most excited about in this move to the private sector?
I'm able to now see, like, I have a pretty eclectic interest base, and like not just like sport, but like it's just all over, and able to really dive into some of those areas that I have like big interests in, and like you don't have to limit yourself.
Right.
Like it's like limitless potential. I think would probably be the way to frame it. That's kind of buzzwordy, but or catchphrasey. But being able to scratch a number of different itches, and not just like have to dial in and say like, hey, like this is all I'm going to do. Like, okay, like I've been in baseball, but like I think I'm working with one baseball player right now, like a football player, a track athlete, like and being able to do it for multiple platforms. Like you don't always have to be in person. Like the virtual stuff is like, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. as well that you can help people out with.
For sure.
So again, I think it's just, there's just, for somebody with, at least like me, who has a lot of interest, but has a lot of areas where they can, they've learned from a lot of people in a lot of areas. Like, I think that's a great opportunity to start feeding things and like passing that information on to a lot of people.
Yeah, I love it, man. Okay, last but not least, number 4. What's next for Andrew Hauser? What are you working on? What are you excited about? What does the future hold?
Those are big questions. Well, fatherhood, I think, is number
Yeah,
one.
that's a big one. That's a big one.
So got a baby on the way in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I'm like, my wife makes fun of me because I'm reading like these old school like 50s like baby fitness books and
right.
Like at the end of the day, like I'll probably just need to throw all that out and like kind of like the athletes we talked about. Like I'm going to learn more from them than they're going to learn from me. I think at the end of the day, but like that's really really exciting. Just from I think even from a marriage perspective, like it just takes your marriage to a totally different place too.
Yeah. Good for you, man.
Yeah. So from a personal perspective, there it is. The professionally, again, I've kind of started to identify some areas where I just think like there's some low hanging fruit for the industry, and being able to like, it's kind of like being a part of a team. Like I don't need to be the guy for that, but like if I can help people fill those gaps, like to me, that's a great opportunity. And to pay it forward from all the people I've been mentored by.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, Andrew, this has been awesome, man. So great catching up with you. Glad we got to reconnect. Where can my listeners find out more about you and all of your new adventures you have coming up?
Yeah, so website going online probably this week. So continuumhp.com. You can reach me. I love honestly connecting with people. Andrew at continuumhp.com. And like I'll do my best to get back to you. And like again, like I just love going back and forth with people and talking shop. My social media presence is not the best, so perhaps that's an area I'm going to need to step up as I move into the private space. But yeah, I've got Twitter, I've got Instagram, LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure I get all the links in the show notes. And yeah, if you listen to this and Mr. Hauser hasn't posted in a few days on Instagram, let him know. He needs to step his game up.
Yeah,
so
bring it.
Awesome, man. Well, Andrew, again, thanks so much for your time, man. This was really great.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. And yeah, we'll be in touch.
All right, my friend, that does it for this week's episode with Andrew Hauser. Really hope you enjoyed it. Like I told you up top, man, this guy's story is really like second to none. Other than, I'm trying to think, maybe it was Brett Bartholomew that almost died because of stuff that he had going on when he was younger and his health issues. Man, this guy lost the function. He lost his lower leg. And it might have slowed him down for a little bit, but not in the grand scheme because he's succeeded at the highest levels of sport. He's been curious. He's continued to learn and grow and evolve. So I have so much respect for Andrew. Really love this episode, and I really hope you enjoyed it as well. So if you enjoyed the episode, I've got a small ask for you. If you're not already subscribed to the show, go to wherever you consume podcasts and do that right now. Doesn't matter, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon, wherever you consume podcasts, we're there. Hit the subscribe button so you know each and every week when a new episode drops. So my friend, as always, thank you so much for your support. This show wouldn't be where it is without you. So thank you. I love and appreciate you. We will be back next week with another great episode. Until then, thank you so much and have a great day.